The following program is a presentation of the Nebraska Brain Injury Association and is made possible by funding from the Nebraska Department of Health and Human Services Division of Public Health, Madonna Rehabilitation Hospital, and Children's Hospital and Medical Center.
This is my daughter Alexis at 14 months old. She hadn't had anything worse than an ear infection and a birthmark on her head at this point in her life. She was walking, talking, no different than any other 1-year-old. On April 3rd, 2008, my wife Tiffany and I dropped Alexis off at daycare. Alexis was upset when we left, so she was put in timeout by her babysitter. But Alexis followed her out of the room, so she was put in timeout a second time. Once again, Alexis followed the babysitter out of the room. It was just before she was set down for her third timeout that, according to investigators and doctors, Alexis was shaken and thrown. This is my daughter 72 hours later. She's been in a medically induced coma for 3 days. This is the most critical time in her life. Alexis's brain is at its maximum swelling point. The soft tissue in her brain is being pressed against her skull, permanently destroying parts that can never be recovered. If one part is destroyed, she might be blind for the rest of her life. Another, and she may never be able to eat or drink. It may cause her to never be able to move one side of her body, or to never be able to read or control her emotions. On top of that, it still remains in doubt whether she will even survive, and there is a better chance than not that she will be in this state for the rest of her life. All of this because of a split-second bad decision made by someone who knew better.
Alexis would survive, but not one aspect of her life has been easy since that day.
That's usually what happens. Yeah, when I get the camera.
The assault left her blind, unable to eat or drink, talk, or move her arms and legs. Nearly 3,000 hours of intense, sometimes unbearably painful rehabilitation has allowed some of those deficits to return. But there is no such thing as a full recovery from what is commonly known as shaken baby syndrome or abusive head trauma.
The term shaken baby syndrome, which is used by the lay community very much, is not a very accurate term. Shaken baby syndrome implies that they're all shaken. Many of these children also have impact, and some of them are just impact. But the term abusive head trauma incorporates all of it. It's head trauma. The other problem is baby implies an age, that it's only infants, and we've had toddlers that have been injured. And then my biggest problem is with the word syndrome. When you use the word syndrome, it implies that they're all identical. They may have been shaken up and down, or back and forth, or sideways, or maybe it was 5 times or 10 times. Maybe the perpetrator also slammed him into a bed, or there's so many different things that could have happened, and they all look a little bit different.
Abusive head trauma cases, as serious as Alexis's, number in the thousands every year in the United States. But a study done by the University of North Carolina showed almost 1 in 100 parents of children under 2 admitting that they or their partner have shaken a child. Just by doing the math on shaking alone, the number of children impacted every year is astonishing. And this doesn't even include other types of abusive head trauma, or factor in daycare providers, babysitters, or other caretakers of children.
Some of these children come in and they don't feel good for a couple of days and they vomit and they go home and they're otherwise fine. Other children come in and they're very, very sick, but they recover and, they may end up with some permanent deficit, a motor skill problem, or other sorts of permanent issues. And then some of them come in and don't make it. And that's quite a variety. And then the other thing we found out is we probably are only seeing the tip of the iceberg. There are a number of children who are shaken or slammed or hit or harmed, however you want to say it, who never have medical care sought for them.
But in regards to the extreme cases like Alexis's, the truly frustrating part is looking through news websites or newspapers on any given day, and you'll see this happening again and again. Mothers, fathers, babysitters, grandparents, boyfriends, girlfriends. unable to cope with a baby or a child in a stressful situation, permanently disabling or even killing them.
The idea that there are good parents and bad parents and you're born that way, outside of a very, very small number, there is evil in the world. I don't want to deny that. But most parents that harm their children they didn't get up that morning to say, today I'm going to abuse my child. They got up this morning thinking they were going to be available for their child.
While Alexis was still an inpatient at Madonna Rehabilitation Hospital in Lincoln, Nebraska, we had to look just 2 doors down the hallway to find a family experiencing the same pain we were.
And it was around the lunch hour, and my phone rang, and it was Scott's number on the caller ID, and he said that Brianne had just called and Chase was unconscious and she couldn't get him awake. I knew instantly it was bad. Like, there's no reason for my baby to be unconscious. He's completely healthy. There's nothing that's ever been wrong with him. Then I didn't get to talk to anybody for quite a while. One of the rescue squad members talked to me on the phone for a little bit and said they had already started to resuscitate him and the life flight was coming, which I already knew because I was at work at the hospital and I heard the helicopter take off, so I knew it was for him. And that was just so hard. He was already in surgery by the time we got there. I think were in the ER for a very short amount of time, and they took him to the CT scanner there where they saw the massive amount of bleeding, and I think he went straight from CT to the OR. And then we finally got to see him then in the ICU just for a few minutes. They let us see him. He was very white, like whiter than white, and cold. Like, he didn't feel real at all. His head was all wrapped up where they had taken about half of his skull off of his head to let his brain swell. The neurosurgeon, he said he would give him a 10 to 20% chance of survival. All of his blood vessels were ripped and shredded down off of his head. I just thought he would never live. Our daycare provider was the girlfriend of my husband's brother. They were never married, but they have a child together. So essentially Chase's cousin's mom is who did this. Her story was that he fell off the couch and just never woke up.
Household falls off counters, off beds, off changing tables do not cause any significant injury. We know that from experience, and it also doesn't make much sense if babies were to die. Every time that would happen, we'd have a lot more dead babies. It doesn't work.
The Junks continued inpatient rehabilitation for 2 months, and Chase has had thousands of hours of outpatient therapy since that time.
It's hard to predict how much recovery any child is going to have. You can't base it on how they look initially or even what the scans of their brain may show. Some children unfortunately make very little progress, and a lot of times they're never able to return home. They need to go to a facility that will provide care for them essentially around the clock for the rest of their life. Fortunately, we also see children who do make progress and are able to get back home, but just because they leave the hospital and are back home with their family doesn't mean that they're done with therapy. And a lot of these children are going to have deficits, whether that be related to how they're able to walk, how they're able to feed themselves, how they're able to communicate, that are going to need ongoing intensive therapies for months, if not years to come as they continue to grow.
Now, 6 years old and back in his hometown of Randolph, Nebraska, the life-changing effects from that moment as a 16-month-old linger today and will for the rest of Chase's life.
That's great, Chase.
Pretty much the entire right hemisphere of his brain is dead and gone forever. So right side of the brain is the left side of his body. His vision is not good. He does wear glasses, but glasses don't fix black spots that you just are completely blind with and cannot see. He falls down a lot because of vision. This year in kindergarten, reading is really a struggle. His left shoulder does function some. He can only get it about this high. It's too tight, it's painful, it hurts. His elbow, we're at a point we can't even straighten it out anymore. His wrist and hand, fingers is nothing. There is no functionality of that at all.
So if somebody said, Chase, what happened to you? Could you tell me what happened to you?
My baby shook me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then what happened?
What part of your body did it hurt? What's injured? Your brain, right? To this day, I still don't know. I don't know if it was like financial frustrations at home and it was taking out on my baby. I don't know. It's that child's entire life, if they survive. For 20 seconds of being mad or however long a person was mad is absolutely not worth it when you could have just taken a break. And you can never reverse it. It's permanent. It never goes back to the way it was, just for being mad.
What we have to recognize is that there are precipitating factors that lead to a bad decision of shaking a baby or doing other things that harm a child. And the most common precipitators are stress. A bad day at the office, getting laid off, losing your home because of mortgage foreclosure, having a fallout with a very close friend. All these things bring about tension, bring about stress that unfortunately sometimes cloud the better judgment that we want to have, especially around our children. We know for a fact there are certain things that we have to avoid, and stress, alienation, things like that we can do. We have the ability as a community and as a nation to change that. My question is, why aren't we?
In his 2008 book, American Sniper, Navy SEAL Chris Kyle, the most decorated sniper in American history, writes of his experience in rehabilitation recovering from a knee injury. He also had a machine that sent a shock to my muscles through electrodes, Kyle writes. It is clearly a form of torture that should be outlawed by the Geneva Convention, even for use on Navy SEALs. Our now 6-year-old Alexis has done this same electrical stimulation treatment, or in Kyle's words, torture, 3 times a week for more than 5 years.
She's getting shocked in 10 different places on her arm and on her back. And what it's doing is it's giving you electric pulses that go through, and they hurt, but it's doing electric pulses going through your arms to make your arm move at the right time to go around.
Those 5 years of work on Alexis's right hand and arm has included hundreds of hours of rehab. All of that has given Alexis more functionality, but it remains able to do just a small fraction of what it normally would.
There you go. Stay tucked.
Good job.
While at Madonna about 1.5 years after Alexis was shaken, I came across a beautiful boy with curly hair and dark eyes that just had an unexplainable charisma. Without even knowing what happened to Antonio, I called Tiffany and told her she had to meet this remarkable little guy. It broke my heart when I later found out the reason he was there. Antonio's story begins with his grandmother, Dina, a pastor in Omaha, Nebraska, who is the adoptive mother of Antonio's father.
It was late at night, and I received a phone call from Antonio's birth mom that he wasn't breathing and they were taking him to the hospital. She called again as I was driving in, and she was hysterical and said there was something else going on and they wouldn't let her see Antonio. And then she began to unfold that they suspected something else had taken place. Neither his mom or his dad, my son, were doing very well. My son is bipolar and had had a very bad psychotic break about 6 months before and was not taking his medication. With his lack of medication and his instability that night, I still don't know the whole story myself, but he was not at all in a stable place. Yeah, shook him. It is so hard as a mom and a grandma. I feel like I've lost everything in my family in this. I love my son. I've loved him from the beginning, and that doesn't go away. At the same time, I'm angry with him and disappointed, and I wrestle with all of that, and I wonder how anybody could do this to this sweet, innocent baby. And I love Antonio like nothing else. This can happen to anybody. I talked with my son about shaking babies before Antonio was born, and on those days that I feel guilty about this, because I do, he's reminded me, Mom, you talked to me about it.
Some people just don't know. They think a child is doing something to aggravate them. Well, this is normal child development. Crying is people think, oh, the baby's crying to just get me angry. She should know she shouldn't be crying. It's not about you, it's about that child at that developmental point.
It's not personal. Your child is going to cry. It's normal to cry. If you're frustrated, if you're tired, if something's going on, it's okay to sit them down and walk away. I've had so many families that are like, I just can't, I'm not allowed to put them down. You know, I as a parent feel like I have to be able to soothe my child. And they feel responsible and guilty when they can't.
I was graciously able to be with him during all of his times in the hospital. It was important because there were no other adults in his life who could do that at that time. But during all of that time, I knew Antonio was going to need far more care than what I had given to my son as a single parent. I'd had the surgeon tell me that children like Antonio end up in institutions. And I was so angry about that, and it was my goal to make sure whatever happened, that did not happen.
Antonio was fortunate enough to find a forever family with Melanie Bartlett, who has now been his mother for more than 2 years.
Do you think he'll push it at you?
Oh, he got you. He got you. Okay, again. Because of the type of brain injury that he had, he suffers from what they call startle epilepsy or startle seizures. Average day, probably 30 to 40 of those. They're not long and drawn out. They're usually very short. And basically when it happens, all you need to do is just comfort him and tell him, you know, it's okay, and he usually calms down pretty quick.
What do people mistake Antonio for versus what he is?
Well, I think, and it's probably the hardest part of this whole situation of having him and being his mom, is that people will minimize his worth and marginalize him. They see him as this broken and battered little boy, and they think, what a shame, and they don't think anything else about him. They don't see the courageous, brave boy that I know, the strong boy that I know that works so hard for just the smallest little movements. They don't see the joy that he brings to so many people.
What do you want people to know about shaken baby syndrome?
Just that it not only affects the child that it happens to, but it affects the families and people in the community. It just has such long-lasting effects. And for Antonio, he never gets away from that. He deals with the effects of somebody else's choice every single moment of every single day. And I hope that by doing this, that people see that this is real, this is a real child, and when they're getting to that point where they're about to lose control, I hope that it's his image or Alexis's image or one of the other kids' image that they see that makes them not do this.
For Antonio, Chase, and Alexis, it's about more than the daily struggles. Medical appointments, rehabilitation, and surgeries are their equivalent of soccer practice or dance class. Antonio had to have a shunt, which drained excess fluid from his brain, removed 2 years after his injury. He's had stomach surgery and may have to one day put his trach tube back in because of airway issues, not to mention the 15 medications he takes every day. Chase had to have a cranioplasty 7 months after he was hurt. Simply put, neurosurgeons had to rebuild his skull around his brain. He had a second one a year later and will have a third operation sometime soon. Alexis has had dozens of Botox injections in her arm, hand, and shoulder, both while under anesthesia and while awake. Just 3 months ago, she underwent major surgery to remove a tendon in her thumb to hopefully allow her to one day open her hand. If you were to look at a scan of Alexis's brain in its current state, you would find about 1/4 of the back left side to be an empty hole, dead brain matter that dissolved away after the injury. You'd also see holes in other areas, a consequence of the back and forth crashing against the skull that occurred when she was shaken and thrown.
When a child's shaken, their head goes through the movement of an arc. Their neck muscles are very, very weak, and their head is very heavy compared to their body. So there is a very large amount of rotating that those heads go through, frequently to the point where their chin will hit their chest and the back of their head will hit their back. And that movement in itself, actually, what it does is it basically shakes the brain apart. And that's what happens in these children. So the brain gets pulled apart, and that's what eventually leads to them stopping breathing, losing blood supply, and then the brain continuing to cycle into injury and sometimes even death.
Alexis.
I went excellent because my mom and dad are here and they're going to get shooted.
Activities like school are a constant challenge for Alexis. She's very, very smart. In fact, much more analytical than most kids several years ahead of her. But putting her in a stimulating environment like a classroom and asking her to reference information stored in her brain quickly is oftentimes too much. Her long-term memory is remarkable. She'll remember the name of the checkout girl at the grocery store 3 months later. But the short-term memory portion of her brain struggles to function. She'll sometimes ask when we're going to eat dinner, just 15 minutes after we've finished the meal. We've been lucky enough to have an incredible support system at Alexis's school, but it's clear that it'll be an uphill battle she'll fight throughout her childhood.
I want to give you a hug.
It's the same struggle that Christine Inspar and her son Ethan of Kearney, Nebraska have fought for the last 10 years.
It was about 9:50 in the morning when I had gotten a phone call from the daycare provider, and she said that Ethan wasn't acting right and that maybe I should take him into the ER or take him into his family pediatrician. And so I called Ethan's dad and said, Ethan's not acting right, he's sick or something, can you go check it out? I'm on my way home, but I won't be there for another hour. So he went to go check out the situation, and when he arrived, Ethan was laying in a pack and play. He was completely paralyzed on his right side. He was raking his left hand back and forth. His head was facing to the left, and he was moaning. The babysitter didn't call 911 at all. My ex-husband, Ethan's dad, had to call 911. They did a CAT scan and saw bleeding and swelling on his brain. The daycare provider initially said that he fell out of a bouncy chair and hit his head. The injuries that were occurring on his brain, the swelling and bleeding, would not be caused from him falling out of a bouncy chair. My naive thought was, he's okay and we'll be bringing him home in a couple days. It was 24 hours later that they confirmed that he had been shaken. Sorry.
No, it's okay.
When he came out of the coma, he was paralyzed on his right side. We left the hospital almost a month later and then didn't have seizures until his first birthday. And he started having breakthrough seizures, and it was like one every 2 weeks. They determined that when she shook him, she completely damaged the whole left side of his brain. And that's where all of the seizures were stemming from. And a week later, we were down in St. Louis for brain surgery, where they went in and removed part of the cortex and disconnected the two hemispheres. The left side of his brain is no longer there.
And this is my book.
Ooh, Diary of a Wimpy Kid. I hear that's a good one.
Yeah.
At age 10, he continues to be paralyzed on the right side. He cannot use his right arm. Cognitively, just some challenges that he has in school. He's about 2 years behind his peers. He can learn, it just may take him longer than it takes other kids to learn how to do things.
It's awesome, Jake. Again?
Agrees.
Agrees.
Good job, bud. You like reading, huh?
Yep.
Tell me, do you have braces or anything like that that have to help you every once in a while?
I have my hand brace and foot brace. Helps me a lot.
Do you like to wear them or not like to wear them?
Like to wear them.
Yeah. When people ask you, what happened to your hand? What do you say?
The babysitter shook me.
I remember sitting in the class about shaken baby syndrome and not really thinking it's real until it happened to me. I understand how someone can get to that breaking point, but what I don't understand is crossing that threshold, crossing that line. And it's so important to be able to recognize when you get to that point, to have strategies, coping skills, to know what to do from that next point, whether it's call somebody, walk away, find a stress reliever for you, but to be able to recognize when you get to that point is so important.
The one thing is appreciate the fact that some of our friends, our relatives, our own children, we shouldn't be afraid to offer help to those folks and say, I understand parenting is a tough job. When you need a break, please call in a favor. I'm more than happy to do it.
Alexis's everyday life at home is the hardest and most constant reminder of what happened to her 5 years ago. Common daily activities for a 6-year-old are the far opposite for Alexis.
Good job. Good job.
From getting dressed to eating. From getting out to the car to playing. You okay? Alexis sleeps with us every night because she doesn't have the dexterity and motor planning to reposition herself or even pull the covers up if they fall off. Her brain injury has also impacted the area of her brain that regulates sleep. It's not uncommon for me to wake up in the middle of the night to her open eyes, waiting for me to open mine and talk to her for a while. Alexis struggles to play by herself as it takes all of her energy to stay balanced, and she only has one functional hand to play with. She burns about 1/5 of the calories of her peers because she isn't able to run around all day, so her weight is a constant battle. Her life is and will always be hard, and it is all because of a few short seconds of anger when she was just 14 months old.
There are 2 reasons Brandon and I produced this video. First, to parents, future parents, or caregivers. Carefully think about and assess anyone who's taking care of your child. In our case, as well as most of the children in this video, there were suspicions before the abusive head trauma or shaking occurred. Be confident in your instincts and of any unusual signs you see in your child.
The parent is probably the best person to understand something's going on. It may not be abuse, but something's going wrong. A parent knows their child's moods, they know their habits, and when those moods or habits change, I think that ought to be the first red flag that goes up and says, I wonder if this is a developmental thing that is normal, or is this something that has happened to my child that I should be interested in finding out? It's a sign of courage that a parent cares more about their child than maybe about the personal feelings that people might have about them.
I've had so many cases, what we call sentinel bruising, which is the infant had a bruise and everyone kind of dismissed it. And educating the families on, no, that's not okay. And there has to be a good reason for that bruise. And asking some of those questions and educating people about what you should look for. Bruising in an infant should really not occur without an appropriate history. Infants roll off beds, they get a bruise on their forehead. They get 1 bruise and nothing else. An infant who's got 3 bruises on their arm, you've got to be more concerned that something may have happened to them.
In Alexis's case, 2 other adults had knowledge of abuse occurring at her daycare months before she was assaulted, but never reported it to authorities or other parents. While it may seem obvious, it is absolutely essential that as a community, we never hesitate to report even the slightest hint that a child is in danger.
I always thought that the well-being of children is just one of the fundamental tenets of a well-functioning society. And if we can't figure out how to care for kids, then there's not much else that matters.
Secondly, this video is produced specifically for you, the viewer. Whether you are years away from having children or a young parent, about to have your 2nd or 3rd child, or a grandparent, a babysitter, or a daycare provider, even a boyfriend, close friend, or relative of someone with a child. This tragedy unfolds daily across our country, most of the time by people who would watch this video and think to themselves that they would never do that to a child. But time and again, these same people cannot overcome an intense moment of stress and make a split-second bad decision that either ends a life or disables a child for a lifetime.
Anybody that's caring for children for an extended period of time, where they're the person that's responsible, and I'm talking about hours. They need to have in their mind every morning some plan that's going to talk about what their escape hatch is. Take a temperature. How are you feeling today? Do you have a headache? You're probably going to be a little short-tempered. Think about how that's going to change how you're going to act with these children. Do you have activities planned? Are you have breaks built in? We certainly can plan for some of the ongoing stress we think we're going to see. And we get complacent. We think we've done it. Why do drivers have accidents? Because they think, oh, I've driven for so long, I don't need to keep two hands on the wheel. I can multitask and talk on the phone and listen to the radio and eat a sandwich all while I'm driving a car. And sometimes you can't do it.
In the people I've talked to who have done it, especially those usually parents who've lost it, they can't conceive that they ever would have done it prior. So it's not something that you think about ahead of time. A number of them aren't bad people, they just lose it.
So our plea is this. One day, when you find yourself in the same situation as Ethan or Alexis's daycare provider, Antonio's father, or Chase's babysitter, when a baby or child is not doing what you want or what you think they should do, remember the faces of Antonio, Ethan, Chase, and Alexis. Remember the images of them near death. Remember the images of them struggling with life every single day. Remember the struggles they will carry with them into adulthood. Remember them in that moment and just walk away.
My name is Alexis Verzal. Here are some tips for caring for a baby. Please always remember, no baby has died for crying too much. If somebody calls you frustrated for crying baby, offer you help. Here are some tips to cope with a crying baby. Take deep breaths and count to 10. Say the alphabet. Read an inspirational poem. Take a warm bath or shower. Put the baby in the crib and leave for 10 minutes. Play music that calms you down. Exercise. Call someone to talk. Remind yourself the crime will end. And please never ever shake a baby.
The preceding program is a presentation of the Nebraska Brain Injury Association and is made possible by funding from the Nebraska Department of Health and Human Services Division of Public Health, Madonna Rehabilitation Hospital, and Children's Hospital and Medical Center.